LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom.
And I'm Michael Kovnat.
And this is The Next Big Idea. Today, the power of noticing what's always there.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? How are things? How's your life? Mine? Thanks for asking. Things are pretty good, I guess. I've got a pretty cool job, a great family. I got a new house a few years ago, and it's fine. I guess if I'm being honest, everything's okay, but it's not amazing. Not like it was when I first got married, or first had a kid, or first bought this house. Back then, everything was fresh and kind of thrilling. Now, I don't know, I guess I've just gotten used to things. I've habituated, to use a word psychologists use. It's a pretty common problem, I guess. It's why we go on vacation or seek out great art to freshen our perspective. Less benignly, it might be why some people have affairs or do drugs. They've just gotten bored with their lives, bored even with the things and people they enjoy. If we could learn to dishabituate, if we could look at our lives with fresh eyes, think of the benefits. We might appreciate the wonders all around us, bring a little joy back into the everyday. We could be more creative. We might also see the bad things around us more clearly, like that messy pile in the corner of the office, or more importantly, the injustices in our society. Dishabituation might be a powerful tool for inspiring gratitude and sparking change. So today, I'm going to talk with someone who studied the roots of this issue. Tali Sharot is a cognitive neuroscientist who splits her time between MIT and University College London. Tali also runs something called the Affective Brain Lab, where she and her colleagues try to understand the neurological underpinnings of human emotion and behavior. It's an interdisciplinary approach, one that tries to explain, for example, why some people are optimists and some are pessimists, how our emotions impact our decision-making, and why some of us are better at persuasion than others. For her latest book, Tali teamed up with another interdisciplinary thinker, Harvard Law professor and best-selling author Cass Sunstein. Cass teaches law, but his research interests touch on economics, psychology, and public policy. He made a splash with his 2008 bestseller Nudge, and he served for a few years in the Obama administration. Their book is called Look Again: The Power of Noticing What Was Always There. The book certainly woke me up to the issue, and I'm hoping this conversation with Tali is eye-opening for you as well.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by Medtronic. Medtronic is dedicated to the pursuit of life-transforming health tech. From AI to robotics and beyond, we're reinventing what's possible, and we're just getting started. Visit Medtronic.com to learn more.
Tali Sharot, welcome to The Next Big Idea.
Thank you for having me.
Really glad to have you here. I really enjoyed reading your book, Look Again: The Power of Noticing What Was Always There. And I'm glad to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to talking some of these ideas through with you, partly because I think I'm personally in a little bit of a rut in my life. And I think maybe I could use some guidance on dishabituating. So I'm going to use you as my personal therapist, if you don't mind. Before we get into it, though, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your academic background and what sort of your intellectual progress has been that has brought you to this set of ideas.
So I'm in the middle between psychology, neuroscience, and some behavioral economics as well. So that's where I'm coming from. I want to understand why people do what they do, why they behave in the way they behave, believe what they believe, interact in the way that they do. And to answer those questions, I look at clues both from biology and physiology, and also from social sciences as well. So it's really a combination of the two. And I think the topic of this book exactly is that, which is we're looking at a phenomena that at the base of it is a very biological, physiological phenomena, habituation. And the same principle that we can see in different animals, we can see also in humans, but we can see that it affects things that are very basic, like perception, but also it affects things that are very complex and large, like social movements, right? And daily life as well.
And how did you come to collaborate with Cass Sunstein? We've featured a few of his books in the Next Big Idea Club, and he is an original thinker. How did you two come to work together on this?
Yeah, so we've been actually working together for 10 years already.
Oh.
We have articles together and op-eds together, so we have more than a decade of working together. So that wasn't new. We came to work together because when my first book came out, The Optimism Bias, on the very first day that it came out, Cass wrote me an email. He already read the book, like Cass does, right? And he wrote me just a one-sentence email like he often does, just saying how much he loved the book. And I was like, Cass Sunstein, the author of Nudge.
Yeah.
And it just went from there. So from there, we started working together on a lot of different projects, and we've done so for a decade now.
So let's turn to talk about habituation. And I wonder what brought you to this interest in habituation?
Yeah. So in fact, it was one study that we conducted that's in the book that came out in 2016. And that study, we showed that people habituate to their own dishonesty. What we did is we brought people in a lab and they had an opportunity in this task to lie. And if they did, they would gain more money at the expense of another person. Now, we never told them to lie. And we didn't say the word lying, but they could figure out, hey, if I lie here, I'm actually gaining more money and my partner is losing, but I'm going to gain more. And what was interesting is that at the beginning, we found that people lied by just a tiny little amount, just a few cents. And then the next opportunity they had, they lied more. Now it's like $1 and then more, a few dollars and a few dollars. So over time, the amount by which they lied escalated, it snowballed. At the same time, we recorded their brain activity. And what we found was that at the beginning, when they lied, despite the fact that they lied by just a little bit, there was strong activity in their amygdala, which is important for emotional reaction. So it suggests at the beginning when they lied, there was strong reaction, they're like a negative emotion, which makes sense because people they think lying is wrong and they feel bad about it usually. But then because of something known as emotional habituation, the amygdala activity went down and down and down over time. They felt less and less bad over time. The more they lied, the less bad they felt about it because of what's known as emotional habituation, which is we have less of an emotional response to something that's repeated again and again. This
idea of habituation, it's interesting because on the one hand, it's very commonsensical. I think we all sort of know we get used to things, and that's we understand that is part of life. But I think by really shining a light on it, you're showing the many ways we don't really realize how it is shaping our lives and our behaviors, whether we're taking more risks, lying more, or failing to appreciate things we have in our lives, good or bad. So I really appreciated the chance to really take a look at that mechanism and appreciated that it's also really grounded in brain activity, as I understand, and that even at the level of cells, like I think you show an optical illusion where after looking at it in a fixed way for a while, the color drains out, and I think it's because you're some sort of retinal fatigue, like something happens in your optic nerve where it just doesn't fire the same way after the first few cycles. Is that right?
Yeah. So maybe we'll quickly define what habituation is.
That'd help. So
habituation is our tendency to respond less and less and less to things that are constant or are frequent or change very slowly.
Okay.
So our physiological response is reduced. And so, we have this visual illusion that, I don't know if listeners could find it with a link or something. But basically,
we could put it in the episode notes.
It's clouds of colors. So there's green and yellow and red. It's kind of very pretty, with a little fixation point in the middle. And what you need to do is fixate your eyes on that fixation point for about 30 seconds and just don't move your eyes at all. And what you find is that those colors then become gray And if you do it really, really, really well, this requires some practice, the gray actually becomes white. And the reason this happens is because if you're not moving your eyes, the same information is coming to the same neurons.
Mm-hmm.
And so this one neuron will just get, the visual input. And after a while, it just stops responding because that's what neurons do.
Mm-hmm.
If they get the same input, after a time, they just stop responding.
Interesting.
And that's habituation, basically. But the principle itself, which is we respond less to things and things that are constant, are true to this more complex things, right? And this visual illusion is a good analogy for life.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about something that really excited you in the past, perhaps you moved into a new home and it was just so wonderful, right? It was full of color, right? But after a while, you've been in your home day after day after day after day, you can't see the color anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning like the amount of joy that it gave you is not as much as it was in the beginning. And that's true for a nice home. It's true for an interesting job. It still may be interesting, but it's not quite exciting as it was at the beginning, or a relationship as well. We sort of habituate to these good things around us, sometimes to quite a large degree, that they actually don't bring us everyday joy anymore, but also to the negative stuff. There are,
Right.
Maybe when you first got your job, there were some inefficiencies that bothered you. But over time, we get used to those things, small things like inefficiencies at work, and big things like racism, sexism, cracks in our personal relationships. If they have been there for a long time, we get used to them and then we stop seeing them.
Right.
And as you said, to some extent, some of this is intuitive, but then there are so many things that are not intuitive.
Mm.
So let me give you an example of an experiment in the book where they ask people, you're about to hear a song, a nice song, maybe a song that you really like, one of your favorite songs. And they ask people, hey, would you like to listen to the song beginning to end, no interruptions?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think you'd enjoy it more if we had interruptions? So we break the song every 20 seconds and, we stop for 10 seconds or so. And 99% of people say, I don't want interruptions. I want to listen it from beginning to end, right? Makes sense. That's our intuition. But then when they actually did the experiment, what they found was that people enjoyed the song more with interruptions.
Mm.
Why is that? If the song goes on from beginning to end, you really enjoy it at the beginning, and the joy kind of goes down over time. You still enjoy it. It's not that you don't enjoy it, but the joy goes down over time. But if I have an interruption, then you have a little break and then you dishabituate, like moving your eyes, right?
Mm.
You're dishabituating, and then the joy jumps back up, and then you listen to the next part of the song, goes down a little bit. I break, dishabituate, you pop back up. So overall, if I sum it all together, the amount of joy that you get from listening to a song with breaks is larger, which is super not intuitive, right? And it turns out not only people enjoyed it more, they were willing to pay double to listen to this song in concert. They did the same with massages. People prefer a massage. They say, I want a massage with no interruptions, obviously. But then, in fact, when they measure, they find that people enjoy a massage more if there are a few interruptions in between.
Interesting.
So what these breaks do, they let us dishabituate, right? They let us get away from the thing that is good, that we enjoy, and then come back so we can see it again. We can feel it again.
Yeah. In some ways, you're pointing to the problems with habituation, that it sort of numbs us to some of the pleasures in life. But there are limits to it. I mean, there's a reason habituation exists. We couldn't live in that state of fresh experience every single moment of our lives. I was thinking about this today in the shower. I took a nice hot shower and I thought, this is nice. And I tried to imagine, what if I were experiencing the way I did when I first took a hot shower, or after a week of camping and I came and I took a shower and I just couldn't believe it, how great it was. But I think I would probably be psychotic if I were taking every shower with that same level of intensity and joy, right? So you have to habituate. I mean, I'm sure, there's a reason why those neurons don't keep firing. There's a reason why you don't keep being startled by the things around you in your house. To function, you have to kind of get used to things. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So as a rule, if there's something that most humans exhibit, and if there is something that you can see in other animals as well, that suggests it is adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
So then the question is, why is habituation adaptive? So there's a few reasons. One, it goes back to motivation, because think back to your first entry-level job. You probably really enjoyed it. You were really excited about it. It was great. Now, if you were as excited about this entry-level jobs 10 years later, well, then you wouldn't be as motivated to get that next promotion, right? So it's good that we habituate to things, because that keeps us going. It keeps us wanting to do the next thing, to move forward, right? And so in some respects, that's how our species evolved.
Right.
Without habituation, we may have not progressed and evolved
because I would just be
possible.
so satisfied with that shower, I might never get out of it. Or I would be, if I was just so pleased with everything that happened, I might not make any positive changes in my life.
Effort, right, exactly, to get more. And then there's the really basic survival issue, which is when there's a lot of, information coming our way. If our brain would continue processing and responding to all the things around you, visual, auditory, you wouldn't have resources to respond to the next things that coming your way. The thing that you may actually kill you. So you need, the neurons are responding, and then they're like, okay, I'm still alive. I'm going to quiet down now. And now I'm ready for the next thing that is coming my way. So that's a great thing.
Right.
And the next thing, you said something that was actually true. You said something, I'll be psychotic or something like that, right? If I didn't habituate. That is in fact true. So problems with habituation are related to a whole range of mental health issues. And there could be different types of problems with habituation. There could be more perceptual habituation, just very basic. In schizophrenia, for example, people don't habituate as fast to just perceptual stimuli. But for example, let's go back to depression. We talked about that a little bit. So people with depression habituate to negative events in their life slower. They don't bounce back as fast. One example is a study conducted at the University of Miami by Professor Aaron Heller, where he had students who just got a grade on a really important exam. He asked them how they were feeling, and then he went back to them every 45 minutes for the rest of the day to ask them how they were feeling. And what he found is when people got a bad grade, everyone felt bad. It didn't matter if you had depression symptoms, a history of depression, or none at all. People felt bad to the same extent when they got a fail. The difference was how fast they then kind of overcome it, right? So people with depression, they continued ruminating over this negative event, right? And it kept causing them to feel as bad as it did in the beginning for many, many hours. While people that did not have a history of depression and no history of mental health conditions, they tended to kind of climb back faster and eventually just, go back to their baseline level of well-being.
Because they habituated more quickly to that bad news?
Exactly.
Okay.
Emotional habituation, right? They're like at the beginning, something bad happens, you feel really negative. So this goes back a little bit. We talked about dishonesty and how like when you're dishonest, you feel bad, right? But the next time that you're dishonest, not as bad. That's emotional habituation. So any negative things that happen to you, you feel bad about it. But over time, that negative feeling kind of declines. You respond less, right?
So that's an interesting example of a way habituation can help with happiness in a way. But I think you talk about happiness a lot early in the book, and there's this idea that I could be a lot happier than I am right now, partly because I've stopped really appreciating some of the good things I have, my house, my relationship, that I have food in the refrigerator. These things are kind of amazing. They're wonderful, shockingly wonderful things that I have in my life. And yet I don't feel that shock. I don't feel that excitement day to day because I've just gotten used to it. And how much richer could my life be? How much more joy would I experience if I could bring back some of that thrill of realizing I'm so blessed to have this house. I'm so lucky to have this partner that I have. Is that part of what you were looking at? The way that dishabituating could increase a sense of happiness and joy?
So I think the key is really this quote from an economist named Tibor Skytowski. And he says, pleasure results from incomplete and intermittent satisfaction of desires, right? Pleasure results from incomplete and intermittent satisfaction of desires.
Which isn't immediately obvious because you'd think it would come from complete satisfaction of desire, but it doesn't.
Right. It's like the song. It's like the massage. You have to pull away and then you have to come back.
Right.
And just like you need to pull away from the song or from the massage, it helps to pull away just from your life, to take a break and then come back. And then when you do that, and it could be because, people may go away for business travel and then come back home. And there's a phenomena which we call resparkling, which is that, after you've been away and then you come back home, like things seem like they resparkled suddenly, right? And I'll tell you where we got the word from. But before that, so after we completed the book, we finished the book, I found this wonderful quote from Jodie Foster. Okay. And she describes this experience that she has where she went away for 6 months to film somewhere else. And then she got back home to LA. And she said, I came back from somewhere that is amazing and beautiful, but you long for really dumb things that you've just used to, that 6 months ago, I'm sure I was bored by. But right now I'm like, my God, avocados are amazing. Or I'm so glad I get to go to the gym again. Things that 6 months ago were sort of what I was trying to escape from. Now everything is amazing, right? Suddenly the avocado is amazing. Suddenly go to the gym is amazing, right? The hot shower is amazing. Things resparkle. I don't think it lasts very long, but it lasts for a little bit, right? When you do that. And we actually got the word resparkling from another actress. So all these, so it's another Hollywood actress. That may sound like, oh, it's only these Hollywood actresses. They come back to the wonderful home and then things are sparkled. But I do think in this instance, both Jodie Foster and Julia Roberts, which I'll tell you about in a second, they actually describe a very humane, regular experience, right? And so this word resparkling was from an interview with Julia Roberts, where she was describing her normal life. And her normal life is she gets up, she makes breakfast for the kids, she takes them to school, she goes back, maybe she goes on a bike ride with her husband, they have lunch, she picks up the kids, your regular kind of day. And she says, well, if I had to do this every single day, it will probably be boring, but I don't. I go away and I come back. And so there's pixie dust all over it, right? So her world seems her very mundane, regular words seem so wonderful because she doesn't do it all the time.
I think these lessons from Hollywood, by the way, are perfectly appropriate. I mean, they wouldn't be good actors if they weren't also sensitive human beings, who could be aware of what they're experiencing and share it like that. So I
think that's right. I mean, I definitely feel it when I'm away, and I get back. I'm away now. I'm getting back tomorrow. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I can't wait.
and probably that's why we take vacations in the first place. That's, sort of the idea of getting away from it all has been around for a while. But I wonder, have you also looked at ways we can resparkle without having to physically go somewhere else for a few months and come back? Are there techniques or practices one can do in life? I know some people do a gratitude journal where they just try to focus on their appreciation of things around them. Are there any things we can do without going away that could resparkle our lives?
Yeah. So there's two things. One is still this idea of breaks, but maybe take your breaks while you're still where you are. So for example, one of the times that I had COVID, I had to go down to the basement for a few days, right? So my family wouldn't get it from me. And first of all, I found that being in the basement was actually kind of an exciting experience. It's like going camping, right? Although I did have a shower with hot water down there. And then when I finally, after a few days, got to go back up to the ground level, I was like, oh, this is amazing, right? This is so great. And then there's another thing, which is this one we took from Laurie Santos. And she kind of, in one of her talks, she describes how you could just close your eyes and imagine not having all of these things, right? Imagine not having your home. Imagine not having your job. Imagine not having your loved ones. And then, try imagine it with vividness and details. And when you open your eyes, then things resparkle again. So I think that is true. Now, the other it's related, but a different approach is diversifying your life, shaking things up, making changes. And the reason is that when you think about what makes a good life, usually people mention being happy, right? When you ask what's a good life, people be like, oh, I want to be happy. I want to feel joy. I don't want to be sad. And it's not only happiness that people care about. People always also say, well, I want my life to have meaning. I want to have purpose. And that makes sense. But the problem is that often the things that give you a feeling of happiness and purpose tend to do so less and less over time because of habituation. So even if you're, a cancer researcher, maybe at the beginning or for many years, there's kind of a sense of purpose, and maybe there still is, but it probably has reduced to some extent, and your research now kind of feels a little bit more routine. But there's this third component that can actually counter the impact of habituation on happiness and meaning, and that is variety. If you diversify your life, and people who lead more diverse lives, such as they live in different places, they interact with diverse people, they work on different projects, they tend to have a more psychological, rich life. And what variety does, it basically causes you to dishabituate, right? You're moving yourself from one environment to another environment. So you're basically dishabituating constantly. And by moving yourself, perhaps from an environment to another one, or from, taking a course in something that is not something that you usually do, you're putting yourself in a state of learning. You need to learn. If it's a course, you obviously need to learn. But even if it's a new environment, you need to learn what are the rules, what are the hierarchy here, right? And learning is a state that people really enjoy being in. So studies show that people really get joy from seeing themselves learning, progressing. One study showed that people, they had to do a task and they got some money if they did well, and they were happy when they got money, but they were actually happier when they learned something new about the task.
Interesting.
So learning actually gives us more joy than material things. Material things we habituate to over time, but learning we don't habituate because learning is change and we can't habituate to change. So diversify your life, right? Shake things up. It can be small. It could be, I'm going to commute to work using a different route today.
Yes.
Or it could be like, well, maybe there's a new skill that I can learn or a new course that I can take, outside of work.
Or a new friend I could make.
A new friend,
A new kind of friend, a type of person I haven't spent much time with before. Or going to a new coffee shop other than the one I usually go to. So trying to build a lot of diversity even into your routine. Even if you're not changing your life that much, you can still find ways to spark in little ways like that. That makes sense.
Yeah. And interestingly, not only does that enhance your well-being and joy, there's studies show it also enhances your creativity. So there's studies showing that even small changes in your environment, like you work in your office for a little bit, then you go work in a coffee shop, or you go walk and think about the problem and then come back. These changes, studies show, actually enhance your ability to come up with creative solutions.
Right.
Because you're changing your environment, and then your brain kind of is more open to the new information that's coming, more likely to take information from different places. Now, studies show the enhancement in creativity only lasts for 6 minutes every time you change,
right,
on average. But those 6 minutes could be the 6 minutes that you come up with the next big idea. 6
minutes is a lot of time, actually. A lot can happen in 6 minutes. I don't know if you have any interest in or have studied at all the topic of meditation practices, but I know from my own interest in that, that there are some practices that are about cultivating a beginner's mind. And it's specifically the idea of training yourself to look at things in a fresh way, so that when you come out of your meditation, you can appreciate what's going on around you in a way that you might not have. So there are these practices of dishabituation, I think, that maybe people could look into.
And interestingly, we talked a little bit about people who don't habituate much. A lot of them, it's not a lot, but people who habituate slower, we talked about how the fact that that's related to mental health problems. But on the good side, people who habituate slower are also more creative.
Really?
And it's not necessarily the same people. It's not the people with mental health are more creative. But they found, on one hand, slow habituators some of them may have mental health problems. On the other hand, slow habituators are also more creative. And I think the reason is when you habituate slowly, that means that there's more bits of information in your mind kind of flowing around like a soup, right? Bits of visual imagery and sound and bits of information. And that could be really distracting because they continue being there. It's not habituated.
Right.
So they go around in your brain and it can be distracting. But on the other hand, it also means that there will be these unexpected combination
Right.
of bits of information and idea that will collide.
Right.
And then come up with this new creative idea.
Yeah. If I've quickly habituated to the sound of birds in the park or something, I literally won't hear them when I'm going for a walk. But if my habituation is more slowly, I hear them. So I'll continue to have that bird song in my head, and that might butt up against some other sensory experience, and that might lead to a creative idea. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You have a richer environment if you're not just habituated to everything. Related to this idea of taking breaks, you did some research on vacations and travel and how there might be a benefit to taking more short vacations rather than fewer longer ones. Can you explain that?
This was some work that I did for a large tourism company. I helped them with their project, and they wanted to know, when are people happiest on vacation and what makes them the happiest? So first of all, we found that people were happiest 43 hours into a vacation. So 43 hours gave them the time to kind of settle in, right, and focus on fun. And from that 43 hours, the joy started going down slowly. Now, it's not that they weren't happy on day 8765, right? But they weren't as happy as they were on day 2. And the second interesting thing was that when we asked them, hey, what was the best part of your vacation? There was one word that they used more than any other word, and it was the word first. The first view of the ocean, the first cocktail that I had, the first sandcastle that I built. The second view of the ocean was quite good, but it wasn't as good as the first. And the second and third and fourth and even fifth cocktail was quite good, but it wasn't as good as the first. Because firsts are kind of novel and exciting, right?
Right.
Then when you experience these things again and again, there is this habituation, this emotional habituation, which makes them a little bit less so. So, one of the takeaways from this could be that it might actually be the case that you would get more joy from several vacations that are shorter, right? So get more of those 43 hours in, more first.
I should take a lot of 2-day vacations, do things for the first time, and then don't do them again, and then wait a while and do another 2-day vacation and do some things for the first time. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe more than 2 days, but yeah.
But I want to maximize it. If the peak enjoyment is at 43 hours, I want to get there and have it. No, I know what you mean. All right. So I'll see if I can take more short vacations. And then another big topic that relates to habituation is relationships. So let's get some relationship advice from you, because I think one of the most common problems you hear about in marriage or long-term relationships is a sense of staleness, that you no longer see your partner with the same enthusiasm as you did when you first met. This can cause, I'm sure, big problems in long-term relationships. What are some ideas about dishabituating your long-term relationship?
So for advice on that, we actually quote Esther Perel. What she recommends really fits nicely with all the theories in this book, because basically what she says is that when she surveyed people and she wanted to know, what time are you most attracted to your partner? She found that there were 2 answers that were most common. The first answer was when I was away and I came back, right? So this is like the break, you come back, things were sparkle.
Right.
And the second thing that she heard was when my partner is in a novel situation that I haven't seen them before. Maybe they're talking to strangers. Maybe they're up on a stage. And that is like the shake it up idea, the diversify, right?
Right.
So she's basically describing the 2 ways to create dishabituation, which is take breaks and changes, diversification. And she's saying, well, it turns out that when people do that, they become more attracted to their long-term partners.
So on the one hand, you might, take a weekend away from your partner. On the other hand, you might take a weekend away with your partner, but doing something unusual, something different, so that you see your partner in a new light.
Yeah. I mean, and this does not mean at all that routines are not good, right? I mean, I'm sure
Right.
couples have these kind of things that they tend to like to do once a year or like whatever. And yeah, that's great. It's not one or the other. It's just that I think a lot of times we tend to do more of this routine and habit, right? And don't, because the diversification is what requires more effort. So that's the part we're missing.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by Medtronic. Medtronic is dedicated to the pursuit of life-transforming healthcare technology. From artificial intelligence to robotics and beyond, health tech is reinventing what's possible. Every year, Medtronic improves the lives of 74 million people, and we're just getting started. Visit Medtronic.com to learn more.
I want to quickly tell you about the Next Big Idea Club's book box subscription. Every quarter, we get our friends Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Susan Cain, and Daniel Pink to pick the 2 best new works of nonfiction, and then we send them to our subscribers. If you sign up, you'll also get access to beautiful audio and video e-courses, invitations to exclusive AMAs with top authors, membership in our LinkedIn community, and VIP access to our live events. Plus, you'll be helping us continue to make this show. So if any of this is interesting to you, go to nextbigideaclub.com to learn more. And if you do end up subscribing, use the promo code PODCAST at checkout to get 20% off. That's nextbigideaclub.com, promo code PODCAST. So we've mostly been talking about the process of habituating to positive things, the good things in our life that we stop seeing as good. But you talk a lot about also the issues around habituating to negative things. You gave the example of lying and how small lies can easily turn into bigger lies. Stealing, that people are willing to cheat a little bit at first, and then they get used to it and they'll cheat more and they'll steal more. Tell me, you actually have that quote from Bernie Madoff that made that pretty visible.
Yeah, so he says, it starts out with you taking a little bit, maybe a few hundred, a few thousand. You get comfortable with that, and before you know it, it snowballs into something big. I think this quote is important for a few reasons. One, it displays exactly what I told you about earlier about the experiment that we did, right? That even if you take the average Joe and you put them in a situation where they could lie for their own benefit at the expense of another person, they do, A, on average, and B, they start by just a little bit and then they, it snowballs, exactly like he says. But I think what's interesting here in what he says that you get comfortable with that. And I think what that means to me is that he wasn't comfortable with that to begin with. Right. So this is not like a psychopath who just never had any emotion, never had any guilt, was always comfortable with lying and taking money from people. It sounds like what he's saying is that he was not comfortable with it in the beginning, but the more he did it, he became comfortable with that. And this is, of course, an extreme example, but I think a lot of these extreme examples are probably these type of cases, right? Whether it's Elizabeth Holmes or I don't think these are, I don't know them particularly, but I don't think these are necessarily psychopaths, but they got themselves in the situation and it just kind of became a habit and not a good habit and one that reduced their guilt and negative feelings.
Yeah. No, I'm sure we'd find a similar pattern in a lot of behaviors, a lot of criminal behaviors, a lot of things we might call evil, violent people or, serial killers, kind of getting away with small things can escalate. And I think your advice when it relates to this is nip it in the bud. Like you want to dishabituate, you want to notice when you've said a lie or someone, has said a lie, a small lie, a white lie, and, call it out. And make sure that it's noticed so that it doesn't just become a pattern.
Yeah. So whether it is interacting with your children or interacting with people in work, I think often if the lie is really small, we just let it go. But I think the idea here is that those small lies can actually snowball. So it's better actually to call it out, right? If it's a kid, call that dishonest behavior out.
Yeah.
If it's at work, someone may just take a little bit off, a few more dollars extra on expenses or something, which doesn't seem that consequential. But in fact, it's better to call out these small acts because by doing that, you're potentially stopping the larger ones as well.
And this kind of plays out on a social level as well as a personal level, right? I mean, you talk about we've in some ways as a culture can get habituated to racism or sexism, climate change, these things which sort of, if we were really looking at them and fully experiencing them, we might be outraged, but we've sort of forgotten to get outraged because there's something pervasive or kind of background about them. I think about this, with news stories. The first time you hear about a school shooting, for example, you're completely upset and outraged. The first time, when a war begins, it's like the most shocking and upsetting thing. And then if the newspaper is filled with it day after day, your own response goes down. And there's something disempowering about that. There's something awful about that, because to make change and to live in the world we kind of want to live in, sometimes we need to be outraged. We need to feel that same sense of drama around the thing that we've just sort of slowly gotten used to. So I wonder if you have any ideas of how we can get outraged again at the things that are outrageous.
Yeah, so we do talk about this a lot in the book. There's and we go, as far back as World War II and Nazi Germany. And there's actually quite a lot of documentation of people who were living there at the time. And what they're describing is exactly this very gradual change.
Right.
I mean, there's a few quotes that we have in the book that are taken from other books about people describing, citizens who were there describing their experience. And this one German citizen, he says, each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion so regretted, that people could no more see it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. One day it is over his head. And that's about things changing. But a lot of things also are horrific and they're not changing. They're just constant. It's even more difficult for us to see and detect, right? Whether it's racism and sexism that have been there for so long that we aren't able to see it. And yeah, so your question is, what can we do about it?
Well, and just quickly, I'll say that some people are better than others at that, right? There are people who just feel the same sense of shock and outrage at a higher level and are able, maybe those people are activists, or I think you call them dishabituation entrepreneurs too. They're people who are just good at calling out the things that are going on and noticing them. Those people are important for making social change, and maybe we could all learn that a little bit ourselves.
And what can you do? I think and we call dishabituation entrepreneurs, these are people who A, notice, and B, call it out or do things to get other people to dishabituate. And that requires making things very apparent. And so, for example, let me give you an example of someone who's not famous. There's a lot of famous examples that you can think of, Malala Yousafzai and a lot of other individuals, but this is kind of just more of an everyday example. It's a professor at Princeton. Her name is Yael Neeve. And what she noticed is that there's discrimination, gender discrimination in academia. And one of the consequences of this is that if you go to a conference, there's usually an imbalance between female and male speakers, so more male speakers and female speakers. And that is true even if in the field, maybe there's equal female and male individuals in that field. So what she did is she made this website, and on the website, she lists all the conferences in her specific field in neuroscience, but you can do it in anything else. So in her field, she has all those conferences. Next to each name of the conference is the ratio of female and male speakers in that specific conference. So let's say female to male in this conference is 1 to 5. And next to it, she puts the ratio of females to males in that field at large.
Interesting.
So maybe the ratio is 2 to 3 at large, but in the conference, the speakers are 1 to 5. So then it makes it really clear, right? And she does something very important. She puts the names of the organizers next to that.
Oh,
right?
wow.
So now there's accountability, right? And no one wants their name next to data suggests that they are doing something that's discriminatory.
Right.
And so that has a huge impact. It had a really large impact, and people started changing their ways.
That's a great idea.
So I think that's just one example. It's very creative, right?
It's creative
and
it's
impactful as well.
Yeah, and it's based on data. It's just making something visible. It's not necessarily accusatory. Like, it's not necessarily saying you are a bad person because you did this. You can draw your own conclusions. I'm just presenting this data. And I think that probably makes people more receptive to taking it in so that they're not defensive. You know, they're like, oh, I'd rather not have my name next to an imbalanced panel like that. Interesting. So this idea of being a dishabituation entrepreneur, it does seem like it plays out at multiple levels. On the social level, we can call out injustice where we see it. In our personal lives, I think, we can call out the small lies. Or I was thinking about how we can help our friends when we see someone who's kind of stuck in a rut or they've become used to something. One of the ways we can help them diversify is by having conversations with them. We can give them another perspective on their situation. And just that kind of interaction with people in our lives, we can sort of provide a little dishabituation for them, help them see things that are going on in their life that they might not be able to see because they've just started accepting it. And then there's also an organizational level. As you say, I think at work, there are so many practices that happen inside of organizations that are either not efficient or not fair or otherwise suboptimal that everyone's just gotten used to. It's just the way it works. And if we can train ourselves to notice those things and call them out, we will, be valuable members of that organization. Is that right?
Yeah. And one idea of how to notice things is what we call, we take it from John Stuart Mill, experiments in living. And so the idea is that we can't really know what is good for us in our life or what is good for our society if things are always the same, right? We need to do experiments, just like we need to do experiments in science to figure out what the truth is. We also need to do experiments in living, try different things to see what is actually good and what is not so good. And how do we do these experiments in living? Well, one way to do it is actually to expose yourself to different cultures, right? You might go visit in different places, live in different places. And you can't experiment in living yourself in like every possibility because life is just not long enough. But you can also learn from a diverse group of people about their experience and their living from both, art, film, poetry, books, and so on.
Experiments in living is a great phrase and a great sort of way to think about the project here, right? That we can, if we can keep our minds open in a scientific way to what's happening around us and test out different versions of our life, we can get around this problem of habituation and live a richer, fuller life. I'm on board.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Some of the experiments are going to fail, but that's
right.
okay.
Right, because you learn from the failures, right? You get information from the failures. Well, I want to thank you and Cass for being such great dishabituation entrepreneurs. For us, your readers, the research and background that you and he have brought to this have put a fresh spin on some of these ideas and really helped me as a reader with my own experiments in living.
Thank you for having me. This was a real pleasure.
Tali Sharot's new book, Look Again, is out now. Grab a copy at your favorite independent bookstore. You can also listen to Tali summarize the book's 5 key insights in just 12 minutes and 23 seconds by downloading the Next Big Idea app. There you'll also find hundreds of other book summaries written and read by the authors themselves. Just go to your app store and search for Next Big Idea. As it happens, you can hear the creme de la creme of those summaries on my podcast, The Next Big Idea Daily. Every weekday morning, in under 15 minutes, I share an espresso shot of intellectual inspiration that you can listen to while walking your dogs or taking a shower. I won't judge. Follow The Next Big Idea Daily wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode was hosted by me, Michael Kovnat, and produced by Caleb Bissinger. Sound design by Mike Toda. Our executive producer is Rufus Griscom. We couldn't make the show without support from the dishabituation entrepreneurs at the LinkedIn Podcast Network. Come back next week to hear how a journey into the bowels of the art world taught one wide-eyed journalist how to see. See you then.